This is Benny Chaplin, the creature from the Black Lagoon, withoutyourhead.com.
All right, and welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I am Nasty Neil.
This is Annabelle Lecter.
And we're joined by Dan Kamin of Creepshow 2, Old Chief wodd'nhead. He's done a lot more. We're going to talk all about him. We're very happy to have him here. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Matt? Wait, I lost my head already. How are you, Neil? I know you're not Matt, and I know you're Annabelle. I just get confused. I get confused sometimes.
We do that to people. It's kind of like
tough
this.
To have a wooden head.
It is indeed. And we do want to let people know, coming up just next week, you're going to be at the 4-State Slasher Con, and this is the first time ever a Creepshow 2 reunion. I'm surprised it's the first time ever.
Yes, it's amazing we haven't gotten together to talk about old times, to reminisce about old deaths. We're going to be in Winchester, Virginia, which makes me think, yes, Virginia, there is a Slasher Con.
And what's interesting is I don't think none of you guys were on set together, so I don't think any of you guys have you guys met since the movie.
No, I crossed paths with all the other cast members, but there were 3 very different sequences, and they were done consecutively. They weren't overlapped. I overlapped a bit because the one that Daniel Beers did, called The Raft, was running late. Everybody was they were having technical problems, and everybody was on the water. And when I got there, everybody was sick because they'd gotten sick from spending so much time in the water, and I guess there were pollutants in the water, or I don't know what it was. So I cooled my heels for a while with the other cast members and went to visit the Grand Canyon. Our sequences were shot in Prescott, Arizona.
Oh, wow. Well, that was nice. Had you been there?
Only that time.
That's really all you need is once.
What's that?
That's really all you need for the Grand Canyon is a once. You've seen it.
I was actually misinformed. They loaned me a car, and they said it's 2 hours from Prescott. And so I set out around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was actually 4 hours from Prescott. So even though I was driving about 120 miles an hour towards the end, because there's nothing you see on either side of the road coming or going, it's desolation. I got there about 15 minutes before total blackout.
Wow. And then you're so invested once you start that trip. It's like, well, now I've gone 3 hours thinking maybe I got lost a little bit, but you just got to keep going.
This was before cell phone days. The only people who had cell phones were, I started seeing them in the early 90s, movie people first, and the cell phones looked like a cereal box. They were real thick, and they were hugely expensive. So there was no way to, you're on the road unless there's a gas station, and there was nothing. There was no way to check with anybody else what was happening, and so that was interesting. That was an interesting journey.
It also would have been before CGI. And so they might, today they might do Chief wodd'nhead, with a computer, and it wouldn't have the same charm to it.
Well, you're exactly right, and the reason that I was chosen to play the part, I live in Pittsburgh, first of all, and the film, George Romero's from here, and Creepshow 2 was directed by his director of photography on his earlier films, a man named Michael Gornick. And I was establishing my reputation as a movement and mime artist around town and touring outside of town. And they wanted somebody who could make that make it look like an inanimate object had suddenly animated. And so it was all about that. It was all about the movement. And of course, as you said, no CGI. The scenes where there was a scene in which the punks shoot me up in front of the general store where I stand as my job, my day job, and that was done with explosive squibs placed on my body, which I really, really hoped that man, Tom Savini, knew what he was doing. And of course he did.
Yeah, and when you say that, how many takes did that take? Because you have the explosions there, and you can't move too much, so you can't be too startled because you're supposed to be the wooden chief.
I only remember one take of that, but it took a long time to prepare it. The costume was a latex costume. It was like going into a giant condom, actually. And the head, because the head was built, it was an actual helmet kind of thing. I didn't have any control, actually, of the movement of the mouth and the eyes. There were motors inside the head. And the whole thing enclosed me so that I couldn't actually even breathe, except that they had a hose coming in from an aqualung.
Yikes.
And so the hose was going, and because of the mechanics in the head, I couldn't see either. So I had a microphone, an earpiece attached to where the director could talk to me. So I was essentially blind and deaf, standing on a wooden tree stump that was about 4 feet off the ground for long periods of time as we were setting that scene up. And the squibs somebody was going to shoot me. The punk Indian was going to shoot me with a shotgun in front of me. The squibs were going to explode at the same time, and at the same time behind me, a glass window. A plate glass window was going to explode, was going to be shot. And so that was a lot of technology happening at once, and it was pretty nerve-wracking. It was pretty exciting, but it was pretty nerve-wracking because I was putting a lot of trust in the hands of a lot of technicians.
Yeah, you just...
that wild man Savini.
Yeah, you had no control over your environment. And at the time, everybody sees Tom around. He does a lot of con stuff. He's doing work. He's done a lot of movies. But at the time, what did people think of him? It was like, this dude is crazy.
Right. At that time, he was just. It was years since the breakthrough film, Night of the Living Dead, was made. But he was still kind of a crazy guy around Pittsburgh, and but he's a great guy, and I trusted him. Pretty much.
Mm-hmm. More or less.
I trusted him more after the stunt was done.
So you're all encased in this suit. Did you have any input on the movements of the face? Did they ask you like how you would think the face should move for a wooden Indian?
Well, of course, I was moving the head. Mm-hmm. All the movements were mine, except literally the mouth opening and the eyes blinking. And so the thing starting to move its arms and its legs, that was all things that I devised. Mm-hmm. And so it was a nice combination, a nice team effort.
Yeah. No, what kind of research do you do for, or is it just something you think of, how a wooden Indian would come to life and move? Or do you do any research? Do you study anything?
Well, I had the good fortune of having some really good movement training. First of all, I've always been heavily influenced by movies. When I was a kid, like all of us really, but I took it really to an extreme, because when I was a kid I saw the movie about the magician Houdini with Tony Curtis, and by the time I was 12, I became a performing boy magician. I was doing shows for birthday parties and banquets and things, and so I was already starting to program my own movements, because the kind of magic I liked was heavy-duty sleight of hand, with cards and coins, not trick box things where you don't actually have to use any skill to do the trick. And then when I went to college, I saw a Charlie Chaplin movie, and that blew me away as well, because I'd never seen anybody who could express so much just without talking, just with movement. And to my great good fortune, there was a wonderful mime artist on the campus named Jewel Walker. He was teaching in the famous drama department at Carnegie Mellon University, where I went to school. But you weren't allowed to take classes in the drama department unless you were in the drama department. They auditioned hundreds of people for every for every person who got in. And I did an audition. I was an art student. I was studying industrial and graphic design. But I saw that Charlie Chaplin film, and then I saw Jewel perform, and I realized this is where that's gone. That kind of performing. They're not making silent movies anymore. But this guy standing alone on the stage, without saying a word, just in tights and white makeup on his face, was doing like a scene of a courtroom trial, playing 11 different people, and you knew everybody, and you could see how one would morph into another in this really intense murder trial, which ends with him getting hung, and he gave this really great illusion of being hung. And the light bulb went off in my head, because it was like the combination of the kind of expressive movement and comic. A lot of his stuff was comedy too. Comedy that Charlie Chaplin was doing on the screen, with a very magical form of performing, because you were creating optical illusions using movement. Why show a man in a dungeon when you can, with sets, when you can actually show the man pressing against the walls and make them look absolutely real, or make it look like you're walking and you're not moving at all. So I instantly attacked that guy, and I discovered a lesson which I'd already learned with magic, which was that a great teacher is absolutely powerless before the enthusiasm of a student. And I would stop in the middle of the campus and say, that thing you did where you lean, how do you, and he would take 5 minutes and show, and finally he said, just come on to the class, don't say anything about it, just come on to the classes. And I started going to his classes, and, I just wanted to learn like the magic tricks. But as I got into it, I realized there was a whole craft that enabled him to create the kind of illusions and the storytelling that he was doing. And it involved absolute control of every part of your body separately. We would do exercises where, for day after day and month after month, we would just do certain movements of the head, just almost like robotic movements. A lot of that movement got incorporated later into breakdancing and hip hop and so on. But it was the mimes that invented it. And Jules studied. Some of your listeners might have heard of a famous mime named Marcel Marceau, who was the most famous mime for many years in America. He was a French man. Jules studied. He didn't study with Marcel Marceau. He studied with the man who taught Marcel Marceau, who actually invented that kind of body control and those kinds of illusions. And so he was like going to the source. And so when it was time to be the wooden Indian, I knew how to stand still, and I knew the implications of starting to move. Where does movement come from? How can you make it look like a piece of wood that's starting to crack inside as it's freeing itself up, like you or I would yawn in the morning? Obviously, a wooden Indian coming to life is going to be creating some new channels of movement.
How much more difficult is it than people think to do that kind of motion, to be a mime, to do those things? Because I think it's real easy to look at someone who's a mime and just be like, oh, they're just putting their hands up in front of them, blah, 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 blah. How surprised were you by how difficult it was to do this stuff?
Well, I had really programmed my hands. I had learned to do extremely technically difficult things with decks of cards and with coins. For example, one of the things I learned to do, one of the first things I learned to do with coins when I got deeply into it was to take a silver dollar or a half dollar and roll it across my fingers. It takes literally months before you stop dropping it just about every time, because it's so, it's like learning to juggle or play the piano. And certain people have a temperament to do that repetition, that endless repetition and practice and polishing, and other people don't. So I knew, but I was surprised because my programming was basically in my hands and my head. To create those mime illusions, I had to activate the rest of my body, much like the Indian activates in the film. I had to learn all the planes of movement that I needed to master, because when you become one character, when you become a different character, if you're really doing it, everything changes. The way you're holding yourself changes. Your posture changes. the way you move from one place to another changes. I mean, you can imagine, you touch your finger to your nose. You can do it in a direct line, and you can do it as if you're really going through peanut butter. You can do it, as if your hand's a little shaky. You can do it with some swirly movements, and all those things communicate different things. So there are two aspects to it. One is learning what's possible to do, the various different ways to change the dynamics of your movement, the direction of your movement, the forces of your movement, the opposing forces that are involved with all movement. And there's the second thing, which is why. What is it? What does each thing say? What's the expressive purpose? What's the difference between a guy who walks down the street and looks kind of like he's scared, like a wimp, and a guy who's walking down the street who's the opposite, who's the bully looking for a fight? How do they hold themselves differently? That's the kind of thing that I found myself studying, both watching movies and television, and mainly real life. Just studying the way people, watching myself, observing myself. When I felt certain ways, what did it make my body do? What's the difference between the way Fred Astaire moves in a movie, versus the way Woody Allen moves? And that difference defines their characters.
Mm-hmm. And now currently, they do a lot of things called motion capture, which I would think, the people who would excel at that would be people like yourself who know the body movements of different animals or different creatures that they're supposed to represent.
Exactly, and they're with I believe my teacher's early partner actually worked on. It might have been Planet of the Apes, or one of the movies where they define ape movies. Lately, of course, since the Lord of the Rings series, it's been Andy Serkis. Serkis is his last name?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was fabulous in that role, which was a combination of his movement and the CGI they did with it. But they understood that it all boils down to a human being moving and defining it, whether that's an animator with a computer program. I mean, even Disney, one of the, I heard a talk in Bologna, last year by one of the people who taught Disney animators, and Snow White, they didn't just sit down and draw it. They had an actress act out the scenes, and they filmed her so that the animators could watch it. So essentially, they were copying a real person's performance, and it goes back and forth. That she said she used to use Charlie Chaplin films, have the students study. The Disney animators study Charlie Chaplin films, or the students who were coming up through her college course, because Walt Disney studied Chaplin because he was one of the the ultimate physical communicators.
Mm-hmm. Now, years ago, I had interviewed Ben Chapman, who played the original creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954, and when he said he had to put on the suit, it was skin tight, kind of like you're saying about for wodd'nhead, and part of his contract stuff, he couldn't gain even 1 pound because it would totally fit differently. And I know you probably weren't shooting for that long, but would you have had to stay the exact weight, or else the suit wouldn't have fit correctly?
I think I had a little more. I think he was the creature. It was a pretty bulky costume too. Mm-hmm. And the suit was probably a half-inch thick of foam, so it wasn't quite as bad as Superman wearing tights, like Christopher Reeve had to really build up, I think. And George Reeves, you can see in the series as he got a little older, George Reeves, who played him on television, the costume had to get padded in a different way than it did when he was younger. And it was kind of pretty obvious. He looks a little like he's wearing shoulder pads towards the end there, and he's probably wearing some support garments as well. So it's pretty unforgiving. But we have a whole different. Luckily, that can all be touched up with CGI now. But I wanted to. I have to stay in good shape for my work generally, because it's sort of like being an athlete to do. I'm still doing it. I'm still performing on stage all over, and it still boils down to movement. Even though I talk during a lot of my shows these days, and as you can tell, I have trouble stopping.
That's a good thing to have in an interviewee.
Yes.
If you stopped all the time, that would
Put a lot of pressure on you.
Well, we can talk very well, but
believe me, I've been part of interviews where it's you'll ask a question which I think will be well worded or something interesting, and you'll get yep as a reply, and it's definitely not a very fun thing to be part of.
How long have you two been doing this show?
He's been doing it for a really long time. I think, geez, Neil, how long have I been on this now?
Almost about 4 years now. 3 years.
Stop it. Yeah, 3 years.
Well, it'll be 4 years in a couple months.
Is this show? Are our listeners coming? Are they listening through radios, or are they listening through? Is it all online?
Internet.
Yeah, it's online and TuneIn, which can be listened to on radio somehow. I'm not sure how that works. But,
it can?
Yeah.
I know you can listen to it on your cell phone. That's cool.
Yeah, you can also listen to your car.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
But yeah,
it's pretty sad when listening to something on the radio is high tech.
But DanKamin.com is your website, and you said you do all kinds of things. You want to give people an idea of if they would find you at a show, what they would expect?
Well, over the year, my dilemma has always been, I got inspired by this archaic art of silent comedy or silent movement, silent communication. And, my dilemma has always been, where do you do that, since they don't make silent films anymore? And so at first, following the model of my teacher, after I'd studied with him for a few years, I started getting my own ideas about about my own characters, but there was no way to know whether they would make sense to people, or certainly, I didn't grow up making up jokes. I would tell jokes like everybody else that they'd heard, and I'd repeat jokes. So I never thought I could make up my own, but I started getting ideas for characters and stories and jokes, gags, physical gags. The only way I could know whether they were comprehensible, or they were working, or they were funny, was to find audiences to do them. And when I got to college, I worked at a rehab center for a few years, and that put me in touch with kind of the whole medical community. And one of the first shows I scheduled, I was able to get somebody to let me do, was at a mental hospital. And I was in the white makeup, and I started, walking along an invisible railway, railing on the stage. And somebody from the audience shouted, "He's crazier than we are." And everybody laughed, and I was hooked. And so I wanted to find out whether I could speak that language. So I kept on arranging shows in schools. Suddenly, mime, which at the time I got into it, was, nobody ever heard of it, really. But some people had heard of Marcel from his theater performances, and occasionally he would be on the Ed Sullivan Show or something, and you'd see him. But by and large, it was nobody ever heard of that. Most people, and especially I was living in Pittsburgh after I graduated from school here, and it was a steel town then, a mill town, and very blue collar. And I figured, if I can get these people to understand what I'm doing, anybody's gonna. So I started arranging as many, coffee houses, schools, banquets, anywhere I could get shows. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do it. And so I, left the rehab center and started, I threw my hat in the ring. And right around the same time, suddenly, mimes started to get really hot. And every college in the country wanted to have mimes on their campus. Shields and Garnell had a TV show for a while. They were on Sonny and Cher's show, then they had their own TV show, and you'd see it in the news. And suddenly mimes started appearing on street corners, doing a different, street kind of mime. And so for a while, there was this sort of golden period where everybody was hip to mime. And then everybody started to hate it. There was a backlash that happened, which I realized historically, when I learned more about it, I realized that's always happened with mime, because silent movies, if you think about it, silent movies are mime. What else are you going to call them? They're a mime form of communication, and they were the most popular art in the world. The American movies, partially because Europe was at war in the teens, American movies and movie stars started to totally dominate the scene. By the end of World War I, everybody knew who Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, these were the Harrison Ford, Meg Ryan of the time. And then movies started to talk in the late 20s, and suddenly nobody went to silent films anymore. The industry thought, they'll still want to see some silent films, but don't want to see ones where people are just talking like a play or singing and dancing like a musical. The public said no. And mime, within like 2 years, there were no more silent films being made in America. The art form was over, because sound movies are different. It's not just silent movies with soundtrack added. It's a different art form. It's a whole different aesthetic. And mime pretty much disappears until the early 50s, where television starts to be in every home, and all those comedians that people used to watch on television grew up on silent movies, and they thought that one of the highest forms of comedy was to make people laugh without talking. So Red Skelton, Sid Caesar, all these folks, half their shows were silent. Sid Caesar's would do all these pantomime sketches, he would call them. Red Skelton's Freddie the Freeloader, Jackie Gleason's Poor Soul. For about 10 years, those shows dominated comedy. And then suddenly everybody got tired of those. And then suddenly it appears on stage with Marcel Marceau for a while, and that gets really popular, and people doing it on the street. Everybody gets sick of that. But then it suddenly appears in the form of breakdancing, and that has its day. And by the time that's done, Cirque du Soleil appears, and people say, "Where did mime go? What happened to mime?" And I said, "What do you think Cirque du Soleil is? There's no animals in that circus. It's the illegitimate son of P.T. Barnum and Marcel Marceau. It's a mime circus. It's all these creatures doing circus acts, and so that's what's always happened, going far back in history as we can trace. Mime gets popular for a while, unlike the other arts, which are continuous. Mime gets popular, and then it gets unpopular, and then it shows up again in a new shape. And so that's what's happened with my career. I started out doing that kind of white-face mime, and by the time people started getting tired of it, people had started approaching me from symphony orchestras and from well, we're not going to hire you to do a show in our college unless you do something in the cafeteria. And I couldn't do something for my show in the cafeteria because it would, like clink the glass and ask everybody to stop talking. So I started developing a different approach, and that's in fact what I'm going to do at the 4-state SlasherCon next week, although most people won't know about it. But I'll suddenly, what I did at the colleges, instead of trying to get attention in the cafeteria, I would walk into the cafeteria dressed like a businessman, except that I had a transparent briefcase, and I was walking about 1/4 of the speed of normal life. And then I would walk up to somebody, and suddenly it would be a flash of light coming out of my chest, and I'd reach down, pick a napkin off the table, and pull a silver dollar out of it, and sit down with the people and start rolling a coin. And before you know it, there's 25 people gathered around, and I do a little silent magic sequence, and then just tip my hat. There's a flash of light, and I go slow motion off again. And so that's, what I found myself doing was developing characters for different situations. Somebody called me and said, will you do a Christmas party for us? Will you perform at a Christmas party? And I said, okay. And they said, I should mention, it may not be a very good atmosphere because the company's been acquired. Nobody knows that they have a job. And I thought, great, just throw me into the lion's den. And I had a sudden inspiration. I said, would you be willing to introduce me as the incoming CEO? And I got up and I started talking and had a meltdown, and then my clothes start disintegrating, and I end up in big polka dot boxer shorts, and all the tension in the room just vanished like a mist. And I realized, I got to do this. I got to find out more about doing this. So I often appear as a keynote speaker where things go wrong. The symphony started approaching me. Can you do something to liven up the symphony for people who are not tuned into classical music, or for kids? We want kids to learn, to appreciate classical music, these great pieces like Flight of the Bumblebee. And so I started applying my mime skills and my magic skills to doing things that made the symphony visual, and that made it come full circle for me, you see, because when I work with a symphony, silent movies were never silent. They were always accompanied by an orchestra. even the smallest community would have a small ensemble. The legend that it was a piano, that would only be the very smallest neighborhood theater. Any big downtown theater would have had a 25 to 50 piece orchestra playing, all through the day and into the evening. So now I'm doing the same thing in reverse. Instead of the musicians coming up with a score to accompany a silent movie, I'm coming up with some visuals to accompany pre-existing classical music, like Flight of the Bumblebee or a Beethoven symphony, for that matter. But I also wrap it into a storyline, and so my shows are all. I have this magician's approach to theater, you see, where I like to catch people off guard. My symphony shows are all about shows that start out like normal concerts, and something goes horribly wrong. I show up as somebody who's not supposed to be there, or I'm supposed to be there and I don't show up until later, or, so it puts everybody on the spot, and it turns it into a show instead of a concert. It's a show about a concert, and a concert's in it, but it's great fun and there's lots of laughs as well. So that's the sort of thing that I've found as a way to continue these kinds of performing that I've been that I was so fascinated and galvanized me, and that made me jump from one art form, visual art, to another, to live performing.
Mm-hmm. No,
how's that for a nice long answer? Wow.
Yeah, it was quite thorough. But it was good. It was interesting.
Let me go.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see for people at the 4th State Slasher Con. You walk around doing that.
I love doing that. I do it at arts festivals. I've done it for corporate trade shows. It's the one thing, because you know what? Magic is totally disarming, and this has children will at first be a little bit scared, because I look like something out of a dream. I look like not quite real. It's like a living special effect. And then they quickly when they see me do magic, they realize, oh, I'm like the magic guy, and they start following me like the Pied Piper. And so it's great fun, but it also adds a slightly spooky atmosphere. I've done it even at colleges where certain rural colleges where the kids will, like, the students won't look at me. So, kind of like practically like hold the crucifix up, because it's like they're not sure I should be there, and is this the devil coming in their midst?
I do
sure,
want to.
I wouldn't scare you two.
Oh, well, you never know. No. Well, I do want to mention the website is 4th State SlasherCon, where you can get all your ticket information. Get a link on our website, but it's 4th State FOUR State SlasherCon.com. Winchester, Virginia, October 16th and 17th.
Yes, Virginia, there is a SlasherCon.
Yeah, that's definitely, Neil was right. That's going to be a real treat for people that are going to that. There's not really a lot of performances from guests at a lot of these conventions, so definitely special.
I started doing these last year. I never had gone. Tom Savini, I ran into him years ago, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to all these horror conventions, and I'm selling my picture. I'm signing my picture," and I did a couple of them last year, and I just knew that for me, I certainly enjoy meeting people who want to talk about the various movies I've been involved with, and of course, especially, Creepshow 2. But it felt like I wanted it to do something to make the whole event a little more magical and special. And so doing my slow motion character is a perfect thing. That it's not a character they've seen on screen.
Yeah.
On YouTube, doing. You can see me doing. Actually, did it. I had a crew filming me. I performed as Mr. Slow-Mo, I call the character, the day of the Supreme Court hearings a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
Notorious, where the protesters were screaming at each other, and I just walked in front of the Supreme Court and crossed the street in slow motion, and all the video cameras turned and said, "Watch me," because they were so tired of listening to these protesters screaming. And then I went on to Gallaudet College in D.C., which is the college for the deaf. And I didn't even know if anybody would tune into me, because I walked into the cafeteria, and usually the way people know I'm there is that all the noise stops, because people, somebody tunes in, it's like this ripple of noise stopping as they watch.
Yeah.
And, within 30 seconds, the entire cafeteria had surrounded me. Everybody just converged, and they were, of course, the deaf are a fantastic audience for visual stuff because they're living in a much more sophisticated world visually than the rest of us because they're depending on it.
Yeah. Do you think that having said that they appreciate the certain nuances that people who can hear might not notice?
They absolutely do. And when I've taught workshops, which I've done a number of times with deaf communities, with deaf schools or whatever, they pick things up. Of course, ASL, American Sign Language, is a very eloquent form of, where they're going so fast. It's like listening to somebody speak in a foreign language. It sounds like they're talking too fast. You can't follow practically what they're doing, but they do. So it's already a gestural language, although it's conventional language. It's not inherently obvious what they mean because it's unlike mime, where it has to be universal. I perform. I've performed literally all over the world. A few years ago, I began performing in Asia a lot, and that was one of the things I wondered: are they going to get my gesture language? Because China versus us is that's a real different culture.
Yeah.
When I first went there, they had a press conference for me with a translator, and I said something about the Wizard of Oz to them. I don't know why it came up, but none of them had ever heard of the Wizard of Oz or seen it.
Wow.
And if you think about it, why would they? Because it's not their kind of music.
Yeah.
And then I said something about Charlie Chaplin, and they all went into Charlie Chaplin imitations. His art completely penetrated all cultures. Because he was speaking at you. And when I did my own show, I wondered, would they think my jokes were funny? Because, you don't even think about how much our culture about. Like in my solo show, I do a piece about Adam and Eve. I don't think they would get that because I don't think they know that story. And why would they? They have different stories. So, but I would say 95 to 98% of my stuff went over the same way there as it does here, because everybody gets, basic drama and basic comedy situations. And I always pit myself against the conductor. Like, one of the shows I do with symphonies is I show up late for the performance, and the conductor says, well, you didn't show up. And the conductor says, well, we're a little worried because he didn't show up for rehearsal either. And I called him on the phone, but I couldn't tell if he was there because, of course, mimes don't talk. And when I show up, the conductor says, well, we don't have anything prepared. What do you want to do? And I grab the baton, and we start wrestling over the baton. And the whole show is a struggle about who's going to get to be in charge, because I want to be the conductor. I don't want to be the guest artist. And by the end of the show, the conductor, I get to conduct a Beethoven symphony, a part of them. The conductor becomes a mime, and the whole orchestra turns into mimes. Everything turns upside down, and everybody gets into the act. And so they completely got that over there, as they do here, because everybody gets the idea of an uncooperative person who's, a child who has to be disciplined, as it were.
Now, how did you get involved with the Robert Downey film, Chaplin?
When I started performing myself and coming up with my own stories, I kept watching the Charlie Chaplin films because it was like, going to graduate school, to study these films, because it was his physical comedy, his movement is just operating in such a sophisticated level. He communicates so much, so fast with just simple movements. And as I kept watching them, I also went to I'm a college-educated person, so I went, and I'm rather bookish, so I just went to the library and read everything I could about how he did it. Like I used to read books on how to do magic tricks. But there were no books about how he did it because nobody's interested in how he did it. People are more interested in, the sort of soap opera details of his life, the scandals, and, he got into a lot of trouble in the course of his life. And I was interested in what's the secret? How come a joke that he made up in 1915 is still funny, and a joke that you saw on television 2 years ago isn't? What was he onto? And so eventually I started seeing some of the secrets because I was looking at it as a fellow practitioner. I was noticing things that made his films tick, and I realized the only way that I could read the book that I wanted to read about the secrets of Charlie Chaplin's art is to write it. And, that was the stupidest thing to do, because who's going to buy a book like that? I mean, who cares that much? You want to read a book about Charlie Chaplin's, all the scandals and the sex life and all that stuff. Well, one of the people who wanted to read it was Robert Downey, who was preparing for his role in the big biography picture of Charlie Chaplin. And he called me up in Pittsburgh and said, I have your book, and I think you're the only person in the world who can help me pull this off. Because my book read kind of like a training manual for him, because I'm literally talking about what's he doing with his elbows, how is he holding himself, and he realized, that I had some of the keys to unlocking Charlie Chaplin's art. And so he got me hired by the film, and we spent several months before the production started turning him into Charlie Chaplin, because to turn an actor into Charlie Chaplin would be sort of like saying, Neil, we're going to make a movie about Placido Domingo, the famous opera singer, and you're going to play Placido. And by the way, no dubbing. You have to sing arias. There's no way to fake it, because Chaplin's art is his body. It's the way he moves his body. So there was no stuntman involved in that movie. He had to do it himself. And so word got out. In the Hollywood community, it was well known, long before it was known to the general public, that Robert had a real problem with drugs. He was known as a very talented and charismatic, but fairly
troubled guy.
Well, he was just a stoner. He was a druggie, and it was well known that you were taking a risk if you hired him. Except he always did these great performances, so people kept hiring him. But the word got out that he was actually pulling it off, that he was doing an incredible performance. So people realized there had to be somebody working with him, and as a result of that movie, even before the movie was released, I started getting inquiries about other movies, and I ended up working with Johnny Depp on a movie called Benny and Joon. And again, it was a thing happened with the Chaplin movie that happened with some of my other movies as well, which was that a script was written by some very famous script writers, had a hand in the scripts, the drafts of the Chaplin movie, but nobody could really grapple with Charlie Chaplin's comedy, because it's so nonverbal and it's a lost art. We don't do that kind of comedy. There's some great physical gags in comedies, but there are no more physical comedies that are really made. And the comedy scenes in the movie were lame, as in the script, and so it ended up getting dumped on me to not only train him to perform in those scenes and in the rest of the movie too, but to create those particular scenes in which he does Charlie Chaplin comedy, because the scenes he's doing in the movie, some of them are right out of the films, and in some cases they use Chaplin clips, but mostly they're new scenes that they wanted for the context of the film, that were not original. So I had the unenviable task of rewriting Shakespeare, as it were, because to me Chaplin is an artist of the stature of Shakespeare, and same thing happened with Benny and Joon, where it was an interesting script, but the physical comedy stuff in it was not physical comedy that was credible and was going to work, and so I got the job of both training him and also coming up with just about every routine he does in the movie, and that led to my working on a slightly different genre, more to the point for your radio show and for the SlasherCon, of course, with Tim Burton on Mars Attacks, in which all of the Martians in Mars Attacks are CGI. Mm-hmm. Except for the Martian girl that was played by an actress, Lisa Marie, and so I was brought in to work with her on what would be alien Martian movements, and we began by going to the zoo and looking at creatures and talking about what sort of creature it might be, because we knew what it would look like, because the movie was based on a kind of a collectible card series. So what would a creature look like? And we worked to develop that. And luckily, because I'd had, as it were, classical training in physical movement and, learning how to break down and analyze movement and put it together in new ways for the purposes of creating illusions or creating characters, I was able to work with all these actors on what to do. Robert had, I would say, the biggest challenge in that he couldn't do just anything. He had to incredibly evoke Charlie Chaplin, and so it meant literally changing his posture and the way he held himself, the way he moved. Johnny Depp could have looked like anybody, although he liked Buster Keaton. We fashioned a lot of his look and so on out of Buster Keaton kind of moves, but the comedy was had to be created anew. You can't just quote gags from out of these other films because it's like telling a punchline without telling the setup.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't work. So that's how it was. I've been so lucky to have gone full circle from a movie inspiring me, several movies inspiring me, and then going to getting to work on these movies with these actors, and just my great luck that the actors who I worked with early in their careers, they were already on a roll, but they've since, of course, gone on to completely triumph and blossom as artists and actors in the fabulous films they've done since then. It was a great privilege.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself, because that what you teach them isn't just for that one movie, that's stuff they could take throughout their entire career. Do you feel that? And so do you feel kind of a sense of pride, not necessarily ego, but some sense of pride that you contributed to this person as an actor?
Well, I was very proud of them for the work they did with me, and I would never, ever claim credit for anything they've done since. People have told me, quite often, well, I see you in what Robert has done since, or this or that performance. Mm-hmm. And, certainly in terms of the movie he's doing, I had to choreograph the things because, Robert is a wonderful, instinctive actor, but he contacted me because he realized instinct wasn't going to help him connect to the heart of Charlie Chaplin. He needed some very just any more than what's a good example, being playing just being a good actor doesn't make you a good ping pong player. You need some technique. You need to know what you need to build up to it. Or a better example is maybe playing the piano. You can fake playing the piano, but to actually do it, you're going to spend some time going dong 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 dong, a lot of time. And that's what we did. We spent a lot of time with drills. I mean, hours every day drilling, because just to change your posture, just do something as simple as bringing your neck up so it's not slumping. Because 20th century, we people in the late 20th century, early 21st century, we're a schlumpy race. People don't stand up straight like they did in the 19th century, like a wealthy person would have in the 19th century. A wealthy person didn't have a choice because they were wearing collars that were stiff, and women wore whalebone corsets. These things sort of held, you couldn't slump in them because they would look bad. The clothes would look bad. And the basic joke of Chaplin's character is he's dressed in what looks like rags, cast off clothes, but he's holding himself like a prince. And princes do not slump. Take a look at Charles and the royals. They stand up tall and straight. They're at ceremonies. They're expected to be regal. And that's the basic joke of Charlie Chaplin's character. He's a poor man acting rich.
What was he like as a student? Obviously, he pulled it off and stuff, but was he great to work with? And was he grateful for your help?
Oh, both. He was delightful to work with. He was so kind, not only to me and my family, but to everybody he would meet. I mean, there were people, we would be sitting at breakfast, and I remember a man came over with his two children, and he just stood there for 20 minutes because people lose their sense of perspective. They get off center when they're around celebrities, and especially a celebrity that's meant a lot to them. And so, for 20 minutes, I watched Robert's eggs congealed as he very patiently answered all the questions, and he never told them he was never impatient. I never saw him be impatient with anybody. He was very gracious, about talking about crediting me for the work we did as well. I remember he was on the Today Show, and he talked about the work we did together, and that's very rare. A lot of actors have support people, speech trainers, dialogue coaches, and if there's an accent involved, or fight coaches if there's a fight going on. Movies are done with crews of hundreds of support people to bring it, but you hardly ever see anybody acknowledging any of those people, any of the stars, because there's a sense of of course I just did this myself. I can pull this off, but I didn't find any of that with Robert, and it was a delight, and it was a hard job because his own physicality was virtually the opposite of Charlie Chaplin's. Chaplin was elegant. When he would sit down, Charlie Chaplin, it would look like somebody doing a dance move. It would look like, not like Fred Astaire, but it would look like somebody, there was this kind of these curves and counter curves that would happen. I'm talking about Chaplin, even when you see him caught on a home movie, was taken to the party, he just always had this great elegance to his movement. And you really see that in his films, of course. But that's not the way, most people are. So, to get that, Robert and I established a whole nonverbal conversational gamut so that we could communicate on the set while he was working. In terms of some of the key movements that he had to keep reminding himself to do, because there ain't anybody who moves better than Charlie Chaplin. He makes the rest of us look like we're encased in concrete, or in my case, a wooden.
Yep. About Chief Wood'nhead, when I watch it again recently, I watch it many times before that, but watch it specifically since we're gonna have you on and watching your movements and stuff. Were the fingers all together in the suit? Because that stood out to me. It looked like either you really kept your hands together, or there was no separation in the fingers.
No, it was like wearing a giant mitten rather than a glove. You're right, and in fact, the only shot I sort of regret, and I didn't know from the inside that it was happening. There's a moment where I scoop paint off of spilled paint and put it on as war paint, and you can see that the rubber suit basically bending. Slightly contradicts the wood. If you look at it carefully, you can see that, and that's kind of I would have liked to do over if I knew that was happening. I would have been more careful, not to bend it, but I could literally not tell. Of course, I couldn't see it until after the film came out. When the film came out, my daughter was on the set. I drove her to the Grand Canyon that day, and so on. And when the film came out, she was about 11 when the film came out, and she had never seen a horror movie because I'm a good parent. You see today, you see these horror movies, and you see people bringing 3- and 4-year-old kids, and I think, what are they thinking? How old were you when you started going, Neil?
Well, the thing is, I've said this story many times on this show. Single mom, and my brother's 9 years older, so she would take him to the drive-in and his friends, and instead of getting a babysitter, they would take me along. So it was probably actually as early as I could remember, probably about 6 or so.
And at that age, it probably wasn't even scary because it's just like, red stuff's coming out of there.
Well, I honestly remember one story, and I said it, when we've had people on the show, and I can't remember everything from back then, but I do remember one specific incident when see Night of the Living Dead in the drive-in, and I was scared of there's an explosion scene and the zombies are eating the people, and I always remember my mom telling me, "Oh, don't worry, they're just having a barbecue," and then I was like, "Oh, okay."
It made it all better. Then it was fine.
Yeah, then I was like, oh, okay, that's all right.
Well,
It's a
when
people
I was
barbecue.
going when I was a young kid. How old were you when you started seeing them, Annabelle?
That's tough to say. I think mostly it was by accident or I snuck around to see them. So probably was exposed to them probably not that much off from Neil, but no one was putting them in front of me like, hey, check it out.
Well, when I
So
was a kid,
really
it was like
ever.
a badge of honor. Yeah, you went to a movie every Saturday. It wasn't, there was no watching them on your iPad or anything. It was the movies you saw, except for movies that were occasionally on television or late show movies. But the big thing was going to the movies every week, every Saturday. And you'd see a double feature and cartoons and things like that. And half the movies they showed were westerns, and half were horror movies, and the third half was sci-fi. But it was like a badge of honor to be able to get through these horror movies, and the horror movies of the late 50s, early 60s, when I'm talking about the period I'm talking about, they were really twisted. I mean, they weren't showing head spurting blood and gore in the way that happened a few years later with the slasher movies, with the chainsaw movies and so on. But there were really twisted ideas in them, and I can remember nightmares. I would have nightmares pretty regularly, but you had to go because it was like a test of your courage to go and with your friends, and everybody go to each other and talked about them and things. But it was twisted anyway. So my daughter has never seen a horror movie at all. I mean, the Pollyanna, was about as close as she got. That wasn't a horror movie. Or some of the Disney animated stuff, with it's rather scary. But the movie comes out, and she says, "Dad, I have to see this one. You're in it." So we go to the local theater, and I haven't seen the movie myself. And all through the movie, I'm leaning over to her and saying, "Now remember, you saw this in the Creature Shop. It's not real." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, Dad, yeah, okay." And at the end of the movie, she turns to me and says, "Dad, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but that's the worst movie I've ever seen." And in many ways, I can't argue with her. But I know that, from all the letters I've gotten over the years and people's response, I'll get people writing, with frame enlargements or stills from the movie, "Would you sign this?" And, that this movie has a lot of fans, like I imagine just about every movie does. But this is plugging into a reinvented genre. Westerns haven't really come back, but horror movies are still very much with us. And, so people have a continued interest in these things.
Mm-hmm. Any horror movies stand out to you as ones that you did like, that you used to watch when you were growing up?
Well, there's one that's kind of I guess you'd call it more of a sci-fi than a horror movie, but it really scared us. And as a matter of fact, I have a beautiful print of it myself, a 16mm print. It's a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Mm-hmm. You ever see that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there's the last time I watched. Actually, my daughter came through for Thanksgiving, and she said, "Let's get some people over and project The Day the Earth Stood Still." And there's a scene in it that things change with time. There's a scene in it where Klaatu, Michael Rennie, lands in his flying saucer, and he's coming with his message of peace or else, right? And he's immediately shot by the U.S. Army, and he goes to the hospital, and there's a scene in the hospital outside of his room where the doctors are talking, and one of them's holding this little jar of salve. He says, "It's amazing. He was shot yesterday, and he put this salve on it, and it's almost completely healed already." And he tells us that on his world, people live to 160 years old or so. And I mean, how is that even possible? And as these two doctors are talking in the corridor of the hospital outside his room, they're both smoking away.
Yeah.
which never occurred to me as a kid, or anybody, wouldn't have occurred to anybody, because we've had such an amazing transformation in the rules about where you can smoke and when you can smoke, because there were no rules when I was growing up. There were no non-smoking zones anywhere that I remember, other than places where they were giving people oxygen where it might combust. But maybe the spaceship of Alan Shepard, but that's about it. People smoked in restaurants and on airplanes and everywhere. So unintentionally, that movie, that scene has become funny. But I love that movie, and it's a beautifully written movie, and there are lots of them. I mean, I grew up watching movies. What are your favorites?
Let's see. Well, I love the original Frankenstein.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite. But I also love, hate to say, but you just said that you thought Part 2 might be the worst movie. But I love the original Creepshow, Creepshow 1. And there's a lot of them. I love the original Psycho. What is some of your favorite Annabelle?
I do like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
I also, when I saw Frankenstein, I do really like that movie quite a lot. Silence of the Lambs. I like a lot of the modern stuff, the really, really dark, horrible stuff. I like psychological, scary movies that are really super dark.
Like what?
But like Silence of the Lambs. I know that not everybody counts that as horror, but that's a really horrifying movie in terms of human nature. But we're gonna go. Neil's gonna meet me tomorrow in Boston. We're gonna go see a double feature of The Mummy and The Invisible Man.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys in New England?
Yeah.
Yes. He's on the Cape and I am in Boston.
Oh, you're seeing the original Mummy and The Invisible Man?
Yeah. Yeah, double feature at the Brattle.
Oh, nice. Nice. I wish I could be there. I haven't seen those for a long time.
Yeah. I've never seen them on the big screen, which I'm really looking forward to.
How many hours away is that? It's wonderful. We're very lucky that there's 3 in particular theaters that we usually go to on a regular basis that have their old classic style theaters with balconies and the red curtain and the stage, and a lot of them will play older stuff or independent films. Brad?
Well, I'm involved with a theater like that here in Pittsburgh. It's called Hollywood Theater, and we just showed The Golem, the 1920 silent German expressionist film,
Mm-hmm.
The Golem. And I'd never seen it before, and we had a live organist. One of the great treats that I've discovered is that you can see a silent movie with live musicians. It makes it strangely, surreally present in a way that a movie with a soundtrack doesn't have, because there's a live person reacting. But The Golem, this 1920 movie, you can see every single horror movie of the 20th century it's just spinning out of that, because there's the Frankenstein story, there's the zombie stories, there's it's not the vampire stories, but Iron Man is there. They activate the Golem by screwing this little insignia into its chest. So it's amazingly evocative, and it's surprisingly effective.
I have to say, as far as effective, Neil and I went to, what did we see, King Kong?
No, it was The Lost World.
We saw The Lost World at the same theater, and they had a live, it said out live orchestra, and we went with, oh, this is going to be awesome. We've never seen anything like this before, and it was terrible.
Yeah, because
but those people, it was like experimental music, like they weren't even paying attention to the movie or had any idea what it was about. It was not.
I know the group you're talking about too, and we won't say what the name is to protect the innocent, to protect the guilty, but it makes all the difference on how good the individual or the group is. And I happen to be very lucky here in Pittsburgh. There's there's a brilliant man named Tom Roberts who used to play with Vince Giordano and Leon Redbone. He's a pianist, and he's been doing scores for silent movies for ensembles or solo piano, and his are brilliant. I do a program about Charlie Chaplin, which as much as possible I'll get them to hire Tom as well to play. And the Monte Alto movie orchestra is really good, and I've been going to a festival. I was asked to speak last year at it in Bologna, the Bologna Film Festival. It's not a festival like Cannes or Toronto of new films. It's a festival where they restore classic films. It's become a center for the restoration of classic films. And the festival ended this summer in June with 2001 with 5,000 people watching it on an outdoor piazza,
Uh-huh.
5,000 to 6,000 people, and a restored, print of it. And the same night, they showed this 1915 Italian horror movie called Rhapsody Satanica. It's like the Faust story, spin on the Faust story, and it was really cool. And it was they found the original orchestration, the original score was written by a famous opera composer that everybody knows from the Intermezzo, from Cavalleria Rusticana, but this guy named Mascagni, and he wrote the score, and they played it. They played it with a full orchestra, and it was just a knockout. So it's all about, how good the musicians are, of course,
Yes.
whether they're playing properly scored music. They also did a Buster Keaton film on the outdoor piazza and an evening of silent Laurel and Hardy films, which we're going to replicate here in Pittsburgh at the Hollywood in January. And, these are simply silent movies. Silent comedies could be funnier than sound comedies because you didn't have to let the audience pause to hear the next line. The Marx Brothers movies, if you watch them carefully, you can see they're actually pausing so that the audience can laugh and catch their breath, and hear Groucho's next line. Whereas silent movies, your sides can ache from laughing because you're laughing continuously.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned showing the Golem, and a lot of people, credit the old German movies for a lot of the birth of horror films, and then it was only a short period of time they made them, with Nazi Germany and stuff that they didn't make horror movies in for decades after that. But you had Golem and Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and just a lot of classic films from that era.
I just saw another one. What was it? It was a late one. What was it? Metropolis. Mm-hmm. They showed the restored, they discovered all this footage that because it was never shown completely in America. It was cut down because they didn't think American audiences would sit through as long as it was, and so most of the original footage was thought lost, and they found it in Argentina in a film archive or something. And so this is the first time that the film has been shown complete, and it's much more coherent. And of course, all those knockout scenes with the evil robot and stuff, and it's pretty cool stuff. I saw a German expressionist one that was really wild. I forgot the name of it, but everybody was, all the sets were like, almost like elementary school children had, scribbled them, up. They were real stylized, but, some like in Caligari, those weird sets just contribute to the El Weirdo theme.
Mm-hmm. I would recommend a movie for you. I don't know, maybe you've seen it, but it just came out a few years ago, and it's a Call of Cthulhu film. And they made it to look like a 1920s silent film. It is a silent movie, but they made it to, the sets are really bizarre, like you're saying, the background sets, and it's definitely stylized. And I don't think it would be for everybody listening to the show, but I think yourself and a lot of people listening would really enjoy it.
What is it?
It's the Call of Cthulhu. It's based on the Lovecraft book and story.
The Call of who?
Cthulhu.
Cthulhu.
It's
CTH. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
It's really well made.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's about 40. It's not like it's not real long. It's like 40 minutes. But it's really well made, and I think someone like yourself would appreciate it.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, it used to be on Netflix. I'm not sure if it still is or not, but it was on Netflix streaming. What are your thoughts on Lon Chaney?
Oh, the Hollywood just showed the two versions and the double feature of The Unholy Three. There was a silent version, and his last film was his first sound film. And it was very interesting to see the two films back to back. I'd never seen either one, and they were both good in different ways. Oddly enough, it's a film about a ventriloquist and some other circus performers who decide to become criminals. Mm-hmm. And in the silent film, in a way, the ventriloquism worked better, and it's one of the things they do is they open up a pet shop as a sort of front for their operations, and Lon Chaney sells parrots by throwing his voice so people think the parrots are talking, which, pretty fast. I like Lon Chaney a lot.
Mm-hmm. No,
I liked his son as well. I mean,
yeah.
Poor Lon Chaney Jr. won't somebody help me? He was always stuck in those pathetic roles like the Wolfman.
Yeah.
He was so happy when he got to do Of Mice and Men. He thought he was going to break out of the mold of the horror film. But I saw a bizarre thing on YouTube. Accidentally, it was Betty Boop meets Dracula. Have you ever seen that clip?
No.
It's like a music video. It's somebody who's playing the part of Betty Boop, and she starts singing a song, and then Dracula comes in, Bela Lugosi comes in, and totally in character. He's quite good in it, and he says, "Try this with your boop boop doop," or something like that. And he bites her neck. You can see it on YouTube. Just Betty Boop versus Betty Boop meets Dracula.
I met Ron Chaney at one of the conventions. That's the son of Lon Chaney Sr. Maybe it's a grandson. So? Yeah, and he actually looks a lot like Lon Chaney Sr.
Mm.
But and he had a bunch of stuff like old makeup kits from Lon Chaney, and this is really I have an interview with him up on YouTube. But he's a really cool guy.
Very cool. When I was in Hollywood, I because of because when I wrote that book on Charlie Chaplin in the 1980s, again, it was a kind of an act of folly. Who was going to read a book like that, as I said? But it instantly opened a whole world of people who are fascinated with not only Chaplin, but silent movies and, the whole idea of visual communication. And, it changed my career. I got invited to go places all around the world, and to this day, meet, it just made me part of the conversation about this subject, because we're talking about old movies, and one of the great things is that movies aren't old anymore. Everybody can watch any movie, anytime, anywhere. And it used to be you had to go to a lot of trouble to see the movies that you really wanted to see. You had to wait till they came around on TV, or you had to find a way to buy a copy in film. And then when the video revolution was the first time in my life that I felt like I was getting as much movies as I needed to survive, because I could buy them and I could run them whenever I wanted. And, it's just gotten better and better. So it's a great time. It's a great time for movies, and the fact that they're so available. When I go and perform, I have one of the things I'll show in some of my programs is a thing called Slick Moves, and it's really just my own movie trailer. It shows me in scenes, because I did cameos in all those movies I was in, in most of the movies I was in, or played of course I've 1/3 of the movie in the Creepshow, but any college students now, junior high school students, middle school students, they've all seen all these movies. They're not anybody who's a Johnny Depp fan has seen Benny and Joon. And Johnny Depp, by the way, people often, for during the heyday of the Pirates movies, I don't know if the day is kind of past or we're going to see more of them or not. Do you know?
I do not. I cannot imagine. I can't see them stopping, because I don't think they're unsuccessful. I think they're still very popular.
Well, the first day I met him, everybody was sort of trembling, and the director and the producers, because Johnny Depp was the big gorilla in the room. He was already at that time a very big star, and if he pulled out, the movie would have not gotten made. And they had to introduce him and see if he would consent to my working, on the movie. And he was a chain smoker at the time, and I took his cigarette from him and pushed it up my nose, and a magic trick, and he said, "Whoa, I have to learn how to do that." And so I pulled out my silver dollar and said, "If you can learn to do this," and I rolled the coin around my hand, "then I'll show you." And because I never teach anybody, I don't care who they are, I never just expose my secrets to anybody, unless they really want to learn them. And even if they want to learn them, they have to go through some
trials.
Exactly, they have to go through a trial, because I'm not going to just expose stuff. It's like against. It doesn't matter if there's a code. It's just feeling the.
There's a specialness to it. It took you time, and you had to put that in, and.
Exactly. It's respect for the craft.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, Depp came back, and he could begin to do it. And so the stuff that he did in Benny and Joon was pretty highly technical. Almost all the stuff. I mean, there was one stunt man used because they wouldn't let him do a drop from the building at the end of the movie, but all the other stuff he did was he did, no stuntman. And so there was a lot of hours. Like he does the dance of the rolls, and I showed him that and said, you got to tell me if you're willing to work this hard, because it's going to take, I would say 15 hours of practice to do the 30-second bit if you want to do it. And he said, yeah, no problem. And it was no problem. But we started using magic when he could when I saw that he was really putting in the time to practice, and he had a natural ability at it. We started using magic as our break. We would work for an hour, and then I'd show him another magic trick, or we'd practice something that I had shown him, and that's why he does it at the end of the first Pirates movie, because it's animation, it's a skeleton doing it, and I wasn't on that movie, but I know for a fact, I would bet my life on the fact that the only reason that happened is because Johnny Depp said, I'm not going to just drop the coin in the chest. Let me roll it around my hand, and we hear it go clink, 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 because I doubt if he could do it that well at that time, but unless he really kept up. But so that was really nice to see, and he did a really good job. He worked really hard on as you can see from Benny and Joon, he worked really hard on the gags we did, even the flips and stuff. He was doing it himself, and so that was great. The magic stuff has had a long legs in my life, and I've had lots of good things happen because of the time I put in practicing, these rather arcane crafts.
Have you had anyone be an apprentice under you for magic or mime?
A good friend of mine in high school, he learned to do the coin roll, and so I started showing him my stuff, and he learned to do virtually everything I could do at that time. We were both in high school, and he never, ever showed it to anybody because it's a different sort of gene to want to do the thing and to want to perform the thing. It feels different from have you ever been performers, the two of you?
Not really.
You never played music or acted or danced?
I'm an artist, which doesn't really take. I do that by myself. So an artist as far as like painting and things like that.
Gotcha, like I was when I was growing up.
Yeah.
How about you? How about you, Neil?
I have videos, and I do some panels at conventions, but I guess in a way that's performing. But, yeah.
He's a fool. He's good at it.
Anybody who does performing of any kind, music or athletics or whatever, knows it feels real different to do it when you're practicing from when there's somebody watching, even if it's one person, but especially if it's a crowd. It feels really different. And when I do my shows with symphonies, my conductors usually have to learn a script in a lot of my shows. And so I work with them to prepare them for the shock of what it's going to be like to do it in front of the orchestra when we're rehearsing versus in front of the audience where there's 2,000 people laughing and throwing them off because and the only way is to just to keep practicing. But some people just don't like. One of my great magic mentors was a brilliant magician, but he never would perform for anybody. He would teach people, but he didn't have the performing gene in him, and so and I did. So I forgot what question you were asking that prompted me to go off.
If you'd been a mentor to anyone.
Right. Yeah, thank you for remembering, Annabelle. I would say the answer is really the work I've done has mostly gone through these actors that I work with on a very short-term basis, and whether they've absorbed any of the stuff and carried it into other performances is for other people to say, not me. But I've certainly enjoyed doing the work with them, and they were all delightful to work with, and but when I've taught, it's tended to be. I used to think I was going to be a college teacher because I figured how long can I keep doing this? I'll either Nobody will hire me anymore. I'll get tired of the hassle of the hustle but as the years have gone on, as you can probably tell from our conversation, it seems like more and different doors have kept opening, because I haven't done the same show and just kept on trying to live off the same show.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of different kinds of things, like who am I in front of a corporate group? Who am I in front of a college audience? Who am I, on the street in front of the Supreme Court? Who am I at a horror movie convention? And the answers to those questions is really, who am I in front of a symphony orchestra? The answers to those questions has kept me really engaged in what I'm doing, and I've just had the greatest time. And so I'm further away than ever. So I've never really had long-term students. So that's the answer to your question. I don't have a sort of disciples, although, I've worked with many, many people over the years, and when possible I do workshops. When people hire me to do shows in conjunction with community shows in conjunction with my stage performances, they usually want me to like do some performance stunt, like walk in slow motion in the downtown area as a photo op, because it helps promote the thing. If I do a workshop for 15 professional actors in the city, that's great, but that doesn't generate a lot of business for the theater because it's not going to enough people. And to tell you the truth, I love doing the straight teaching work and the analytical work. Some of it I put into my own. I've now written 2 books, and there's some more on the way about Charlie Chaplin, because his work is just endlessly fascinating to me. But so a lot of my understanding of craft is in those books and other writings that I've done, and I'm now starting to write fiction that incorporates some of it as well. But mainly, I just get the biggest kick out of just performing and either getting the aha reaction, the ooh reaction to the illusion or magic trick, or the especially laughter. I love doing comedy, and so the answer to your question is along the way. The way, in the same way that I learned from mentors that I would meet. And by the way, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and so my mentors I hung out with the magicians, and at that time, Miami was sort of an early Las Vegas kind of place with nightclubs and gambling, and Al Capone was in jail there, and so there were a lot of criminals that used to hang out with the magicians too. Not a lot, but a few. And I was really drawn to these people because they represented an extremely high level of craft, because they couldn't show off in front of their victims. They could show off in front of an eager teenager who was fascinated with the physical skills they represented. And so I was meeting people with names like Evil Eye Finkel.
Wow.
Was, if you remember the old Al Cap, Little Abner strip, Al Cap used him. He was a fairly famous person, and he was like a con man in the boxing world. He was supposed to be somebody you could hire to give somebody the evil eye, so the opposing boxer would see him in the ringside and get spooked. And obviously, he was a consummate con man. But the guys who interested me were the ones who were, who would come down and having made a fortune cheating at cards in the coal fields of West Virginia, and they would come down and show me how they did it, and I used it for magic tricks. I never cheated anybody in my life, certainly not that I'll admit to, but I couldn't, because my friends stopped playing cards with me when I was 13. I was trying to cheat them. But, it was a colorful, in retrospect, it was this sort of colorful Damon Runyon, Guys and Dolls-esque cast of characters that I was coming across, and all of which I've drawn on for the characters that I've created. So, I've been having a great ride, and it's continuing. And I'm excited about this SlasherCon coming up too, because I really just didn't want to sit behind the table and sign pictures, and take pictures with people. That's fine. I'm going to spend time doing that, but I'm looking forward to spooking out the horror fans.
I have no doubt people will appreciate that a lot, and I think for you guys that have to sit there at a booth all day, I would probably way rather be up doing something than just not. I think the same thing as you're trying to say. Not that there's anything wrong with meeting people. It's just you're sitting down all day.
Well,
when
even
you could
sitting
be
down, I would
entertaining
tend to
people.
say, sit down, and then start showing, do a little magic.
Yeah.
Let me give them something back for their money. I don't.
Yeah.
I understand that the people, enjoy meeting the people they've seen on the screen, and that's fine. But I want to mess with their heads a little more than that, and in a fun way.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit at the other horror cons, not as much as I'll be doing it here, but it felt like just the right thing to do. It's like, who am I at the horror con? And it's Mr. Slow-Mo.
I do want to mention real quick is when you mentioned about cheating at cards, and that's how some of the magic tricks from cards kind of came from. We were at Magic Castle this year, which is in L.A., and
Good for you.
that was a great experience, and we went to see it was the up close. I forget what they call it. It was like the up close.
Close-up room.
Close-up room, yeah. And he told the story about how a lot of these tricks had come from old cheaters, in different casinos and stuff. Which he said it's hard to do nowadays, but it was a really interesting story, and it was great to see.
Yeah, one of the guys owned a nightclub who would hang out with the magicians, and we'd all meet every Saturday at a restaurant, the Mayflower Restaurant in Miami, downtown Miami. And there was a guy named Jimmy Grippo, and he owned the 21 Club. And Jimmy, you can get a picture of him because he looked exactly like Larry Fine from the Three Stooges, except that his hair was jet black, and he had a glass eye. And he did really good stuff with cards. And that's the night I met Evil Eye Finkel, because he invited me to come to his nightclub, which was illegal. You were supposed to be 21. I was 16. You were supposed to be 21 to go into a nightclub.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a famous magician coming in from Chicago who would do gambling exposés, and Evil Eye Finkel was sitting there too. And until I read his obituary just a few years ago, I always thought Evil Eye was from Chicago and was a friend of this famous magician, John Scarney. But Evil Eye, in fact, was living in Miami. He'd retired to Miami and was just, doing whatever cons he was doing in Miami. So this was really heady stuff to be seeing people who were living this kind of life, doing this kind of work. And I didn't want to be a magician because at that time it was before David Copperfield and David Blaine and all these people who reinvented magic really for a new generation. At that time, a career in magic meant performing in a smoky nightclub and with strippers, appearing after you and stuff. And it seemed like a little too sleazy a world for me.
So instead, you're hanging out with Evil Eye so-and-so and Larry Fine.
I ended up hanging out with him then. It's true. And I recently, the one guy who taught me a lot of my best magic, he was a lawyer. His brother was a card sharp. And he was the one who wouldn't perform. He did this beautiful magic, but he wouldn't perform it. He used to get scheduled to perform it for other magicians at a magic convention. He just wouldn't show up the day of his performance.
Oh, wow.
He was just shy about performing, but he took me under his wing, and I realized, you don't think about this when you're a teenager, a teacher who did something that meant something to you. And this guy it was odd because it wasn't a school teacher. I was just going and having lunch, and he would sometimes say, "Oh, come on back to the office," and we would, continue doing magic, or we'd go shopping for some magic props or whatever. And after I left high school, I never had any contact with him because he was a grown-up and I was not a grown-up. I was in the world of kids. And it occurred to me a few years ago that I never thanked him. And I tracked him down through the lawyers' organizations, and he was retired and living with one of his daughters in the Midwest. And I called him and I thanked him, and it was the greatest feeling. And I said, Floyd, I want you to know that these things, this beautiful, elegant magic you showed me with coins and cards and thimbles, I have done for tens of thousands of people and over the years, and I've never thanked you, and I'm so glad to catch up with you again to thank you. And that was and he didn't remember who I was, because I was one of probably a lot of people he mentored. And I called him back the next day, and I said, he was a little suspicious, maybe I'm somebody trying to con him or something. Mm-hmm. And I called him back the next day because I remembered something that I that I thought would jog his memory. And I said, Floyd, I don't want to bother you. He said, Danny, you call me anytime. I was on the internet. Your stuff is great. You're it's like in the mid-'80s, checking my YouTube clips out. And I said, well, Floyd, I just remembered this time we went to a 5 and 10. We bought a bunch of plastic thimbles. You can't do magic with metal thimbles. You have to use plastic thimbles because you can't. The metal thimbles are too slippery. And I said, so we went to the 5 and 10, and we bought a couple of handfuls of thimbles. And the cashier, when we're checking out, these two guys walking out with 25 thimbles, and she gave us a really funny look. And Floyd, you put your arm around me and said, "Come, son, back to the institution." And we walked out, and he laughed, and that jogged his memory. So, it's great because it was just, there are these people who give us great gifts in our life, and so often, by the time we think of thanking them, they're gone or it's too late. And so that was a great feeling to reconnect. I've had a lot of great teachers in my life that inspired me. I'm still thanking I'll be seeing my mime teacher probably the day before the conference. He's still alive and kicking, and he lives about 2 hours from Winchester.
Oh, nice. So, yourself, Daniel Beer from The Raft, Tom Wright, who we talked to last year, who was a very funny guy if you've not met him yet, from the Hitchhiker episode. All three of you will be part of the Creepshow 2 reunion, first time ever, at 4 State Slasher Con, coming up just next weekend, October 16th and 17th. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I really didn't get to know these guys on the set. And the first day I was there, they put me in the costume, and I just sat there for 15 hours, and they didn't use me.
Oh.
And when they took the costume off, it was cemented with what's surgical glue. The arms were, it was like a flat sheet that had to be formed around my arms and then cemented on the seam. And when they took it off, I had blisters that were an inch high all up and down my one arm. And I got an emergency room visit that night, but I was fine. And then I didn't have to wait in the costume for a long time. I got better treatment after that.
Yeah.
So I've suffered for my art. I've suffered for your thrills.
I did have another question. Did you play the Indian while he's just the statue too? Well, I mean, when he's not moving and he's just shown as solitary, or did they also have a statue?
They also had a statue, and so I'm sometimes the statue, being very still, but I can do that. Like when I do my Mr. Slow-Mo, occasionally I stop and freeze exactly like that statue. And I can make that convincing in real life, but it's much more hard to be convincing doing that in a movie, because, the slightest movement you're going to see in a movie.
Yeah.
In real life, it's striking when somebody, you see mimes do that on the streets. They're not even mimes exactly. They're just living statues, as it were. It can be very convincing in real life, but it's much harder in a movie. So it's catch me if you can kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So everyone out there who can make it, I hope they make it out to 4 State Slasher Con. Get your ticket information, 4stateslashercon.com. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
I've enjoyed talking with you two as well. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Neil, for having me on.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful. And good luck out there. Have a lot of fun.
I'll see if I can't creep some people out.
and hope to run into you one of these days.
Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Well, hopefully not in the dark alley.
Right. No evil eye
Great
finkel
talking
around.
with you, folks.
Thank you very much.
It was great to have you.
Hey, this is Alan Troutman, and you are listening to WithoutYourHead.com. I don't know how you can listen without your head, but there you are.